Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a microscopic mechanical failure that honestly nobody warns you about when you're starting out, but it ruins data all the time if you work with HPLC. You know the unique agony of realizing an entire 24-hour run is just pure garbage. So let's talk about septa coring, the silent cause of bad HPLC results. You're definitely going to want to pay close attention to this one.
Ever had a mysterious ghost peak pop up out of nowhere? Or a system pressure alarm you just couldn't explain? Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. You might be tearing your hair out, checking your mobile phase, or redoing your sample prep, completely unaware that the actual culprit is just sitting right there, hiding in the vial cap.
To solve this mystery today, we're covering 5 things. First, the silent killer itself. Second, the anatomy of coring. Third, spotting the symptoms. Fourth, prevention. And finally, the big picture impact.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the silent killer.
Before we get into the failure, we gotta look at the hardware. We're talking about the septum. You know it, that tiny rubber or silicone disc tucked inside an HPLC vial cap. Its whole job is to let the injection needle pierce it, withdraw the sample, and then magically reseal itself. This is absolutely essential when your vial is just sitting in an auto-sampler queue for hours on end. It stops evaporation, keeps out oxygen so your sample doesn't oxidize, and basically stops external contamination dead in its tracks. And you're not just poking a hole in a piece of rubber here. It's a highly engineered barrier with a dual-layer defense. On the sample side, you've got a PTFE face. That's a hard, chemically inert film to keep your solvents from reacting with the rubber. Then, right underneath that is the silicone layer, which gives it that flexible elasticity to snap back and reseal after a puncture. This layered setup is absolutely critical because if that defense breaks down, well, your sample is completely compromised. Which brings us to the actual silent killer, an event known as septa coring. Basically, this is a mechanical failure. Instead of cleanly parting the rubber and slipping through smoothly, the needle acts like a tiny cookie cutter. It punches straight through that dual layer and literally shears off a small plug or fragment of the septum material as it pushes down.
Moving on to part 2, the anatomy of septa coring. Let's see exactly how this failure builds up.
Let's look at this cookie cutter effect in slow motion. Step 1, the needle comes down, but it strikes the septum off-center, or maybe the needle tip is just dull. Step 2, because it can't pierce cleanly, the tip shears a microscopic rubber plug right out of the septum. And step 3, that tiny sheared fragment becomes a rogue variable in your system. It either drops right down into your precious sample, or worse, gets sucked straight up into the needle.
The big takeaway here is that coring isn't just some random bad luck. It's heavily driven by specific risk factors in your setup. If you look at the high-risk column, things like taking repeated injections from the exact same vial will eventually weaken the material. A dull or improperly shaped needle, massive offender. If your autosampler alignment is even slightly off-center from the injection zone, the needle hits at a bad angle. And of course, using cheap septum materials that just aren't compatible with aggressive solvents will make the rubber brittle, making it a prime target for coring.
Okay, part 3, spotting the symptoms. Let's look at how to read the forensic clues this leaves behind. Depending on where that rogue piece of rubber travels, you might see a whole bunch of incredibly frustrating symptoms. We're talking sudden, unexplained ghost peaks on your chromatogram that definitely weren't there yesterday. Or maybe needle clogs, which absolutely wreck your injection volumes and destroy your reproducibility. You might get sudden pressure spikes and system alarms. Over time, these fragments can even degrade your highly sensitive column packing material, or worst-case scenario, trigger false positives in highly sensitive trace analysis.
So you really have to map the symptom back to the root cause. Where the fragment ends up dictates exactly what goes wrong. If it's wedged in the needle, you get blocked flow and terrible injection volumes. If it gets stuck in the tubing, flow is restricted and your system pressure spikes. And if it makes it all the way down to the column, its chemical signature slowly bleeds into your run, creating those dreaded ghost peaks. Actually, in impurity testing, this rubber fragment's chemical signature can literally mimic a real impurity. Crazy, right?
All right, part 4, prevention and best practices. How do we stop this from happening?
One of the absolute easiest, immediate fixes you can make is just switching up your consumables. Check out this comparison. Solid septa rely entirely on a perfectly sharp needle and a clean puncture every single time, which is a huge risk under repeated use. But pre-slit or cross-slit septa, they actually have a pre-cut path designed specifically for autosamplers. It's brilliant. It just guides the needle through the slit instead of forcing it to violently punch a brand new hole through solid rubber. It significantly drops your coring risk. Now keep this number in the back of your mind, 50 to 100.
That is the typical maximum rated puncture count for a standard septum. If you push it beyond that limit, the material becomes super brittle, deeply weakened, and way more likely to fall apart and core. Seriously, never assume a septum is good forever just because the cap still feels screwed on tight.
So, let's put this all together into a preventative checklist. First off, switch to pre-slit septa if you can. Always double-check that your septum material is chemically compatible with the specific solvent system you're running. Strictly enforce those puncture limits we just talked about. Take the time to routinely calibrate your autosampler so the needle hits the exact center every time. And honestly, just use your eyes. Visually inspect your used caps. If you see ragged holes, missing divots, or core fragments missing, you've got a problem. Doing this will save you hours, maybe even days of unnecessary troubleshooting.
Finally, Part 5. The big picture impact. Why does this tiny failure actually matter? You see, in a commercial QA/QC lab, especially in regulated pharmaceutical testing, an unexplained ghost peak isn't just some minor annoyance. Legally, it triggers a massive out-of-specification or OOS investigation. A single, microscopic rubber fragment masquerading as a peak can literally bring an entire commercial laboratory to a grinding halt.
Look at this devastating domino effect. What starts out as a tiny puncture in Step 1 creates a false positive that immediately triggers Step 2, a legally mandated OS investigation, which then leads straight to Step 3, the batch release of a vital pharmaceutical product gets delayed. The company is now burning massive amounts of time, money, and scientific resources on a root cause analysis, all over a tiny piece of degraded silicone.
Ultimately, understanding something as small as septa coring empowers you. It can literally be the difference between a seasoned analyst saying, "Oh, it's just a hardware artifact," and taking 5 minutes to swap a cap, versus an inexperienced analyst wrongly suspecting a real product impurity and stopping $1 million production run.
So, I'll leave you with this final thought. The next time your HPLC system throws an unexpected pressure alarm, or you spend hours staring at some mysterious ghost peak that defies all logic, ask yourself, is your autosampler hiding a silent killer? Is the real culprit sitting right there in the vial cap, just waiting to be found? Check your septa, maintain your needles, and protect your data.